This morning. Thank you everyone for being here. My name is Michael Carduccio. I'm the president of the Oklahoma Council of Public Affairs. This is OCPA's 20th year. We were launched in 1993 as a nonprofit organization dedicated to free enterprise, limited government, and the individual initiative. And so this is part of that dialogue today. We thought it was important that in the discussion about the state of Oklahoma and the budgeting practices of the state that we always make sure first and foremost that it's about the citizens. It's about the families in Oklahoma and how can we do the right approach to governing, but make sure that we are empowering citizens, providing the most opportunity in this state for our children to grow and for our people to thrive. And we believe that through free enterprise and limited government, that is the path to prosperity that our state should be looking toward. Of course, we know that many other states are moving in that direction. We are in a competitive marketplace. States are competing all the time, and so it's important that we're always thinking in this process in Oklahoma. With that in mind, we want to move along in the press conference today. In a minute, I'll introduce my colleague to talk a little bit about OCPA's budget that we are releasing today, and then also hear from some state leaders that will have some specific comments about what the state can do and should do that we definitely think is best to empower our citizens. With that, let me introduce Jonathan Small. He is the author of OCPA's budget book, and he is the fiscal policy director of OCPA. And one thing important that we should note about Jonathan, I believe he's the only person involved in the policymaking process outside the building that has had an intimate knowledge in the budget process from every branch, if you will, of state government and through the budgeting practices, so has a unique perspective there. Last thing I'll say is you'll notice the subtext of this budget book is a state budget that respects your family budget, and that's where our focus should be. So with that, Jonathan Small.
Thank you, Michael. We really think that this is a great opportunity today to highlight some of the places where government can trim, refocus money to core areas of government, but then also ensure that we provide tax relief for Oklahomans. Just so everyone has a background, let's remember that the total state spending that the state is experiencing right now is at an all-time high. We've actually never seen total state spending decrease, even over two recessionary periods. And some of the relatively small cuts in this large scheme of things actually are not that much when you compare the growth that happened. We had two separate periods where growth in state government was over 40% over 6-year periods. So any efforts that have had to been used to curtail that spending has been a result really of spending that was unsustainable. I think there's some really important things to remember about our budget, which is one is that we're going to be recommending that state appropriations equal about $6.6 billion, which is actually more than what was appropriated in fiscal year 2012. Also, the thing to remember about our state budget is that it's just one small portion of a large pie. One of the things that OCPA is trying to keep at the forefront of everyone's mind is that federal spending and the intrusion of the federal government is significantly driving state spending. So one of the reforms that you're going to see is that we are not going to turn a blind eye to how out of control our state Medicaid budget has grown. We want to see Oklahoma adopt reforms that are patient-centered, that are resulting in better health outcomes and saving taxpayer dollars. You'll notice that in our budget, we are recommending reforms that have been pursued by Louisiana, Florida, other states that are pursuing reform, and they've actually been adopted and approved by the current Obama administration. Louisiana implemented Medicaid reforms that resulted in savings of $135 million just from one portion of its program. OCPA is recommending that those kinds of similar improvements be made in our Medicaid program. Something that's been talked about for a few years now here at the Capitol is state employee health insurance reform. It's time for that not to just be discussed, but for it to actually be implemented. Indiana has seen savings of millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars from converting its employees to a health savings account plan. It's time for us to implement that in Oklahoma. To give you an idea of what that means, when Oklahoma overpays for its benefits, it causes approximately 62,000 Oklahomans to pay personal income tax that otherwise they wouldn't have to. Also, our budget wants to focus funding on core services. We no longer want to see the state fund attempts at space travel. Oklahoma has failed in this endeavor. It's not a core function of government. We don't think that roughly 287 taxpayers a year should be required to fund the Space Development Authority. When you look at the history of attempts at space travel in Oklahoma, taxpayers have been forced to fork over $30 million over that time period. We also think that it's time to end political earmarks, which total about approximately $10.8 million a year. We think it's unreasonable to ask citizens to take hard-earned money from their pockets and spend it on targeted, untransparent earmarks. And what's interesting about that is that's just the number that we're aware of right now, that because the current appropriations that are made in the budget are not transparently line itemed out, that's just the minimum. So we would like to see improvement in that process as well. Some of the things where OCPA is recommending increasing funding without increasing debt is the medical examiner's office. You'll notice if you look at OCPA's budget, we provide a way to replace the dilapidated medical examiner's office without using any bonds. We also provide a way for the state to take care of the external needs of the state capitol without issuing bonds. And finally, the most important piece of our budget is structuring it in such a way so that we can have an immediate income tax cut for Oklahomans beginning January 1, 2014. By making a small restructuring in government, all we're doing is asking government to spend about 2% less than it did as far as appropriations are concerned, which is nothing when you consider the fact that many Oklahomans lost 2% of their income because of the largesse of the federal government. We believe that this small step can be made. It can be made without arbitrarily increasing personal income tax burdens for any Oklahoman. So Oklahomans under our plan would see a 0.5% cut, but still they would not have to see their personal exemption go away, child tax credits or other credits, or even some of the other business credits. Our plan is done based out of growth revenue, and which we've seen when you look back at the history of Oklahoma since we've been doing tax cuts since 2004. State income tax collections actually never declined the next year. And in fact, the only time that we've ever seen personal income tax collections decline was when we hit the deep recession. So with that, I'd like to close the comments and then turn it over to any lawmakers that would be interested in making some comments about where they see reform to happen this year.
I'd just like to say that we are very appreciative of the capital of OCPA. It is wonderful to have a private think tank, a conservative private think tank, to give us these kind of numbers and to work with. And to so often what we hear is the liberal viewpoint. We hear the Oklahoma Policy Institute, we hear from the agencies, and the hand is always out. And it's good to work with somebody who's fiscally responsible and can give us ideas to run with, but on the other hand, we'll also take our ideas like Senate Bill 1062, workers' comp reform, like the franchise tax and the income tax proposals, and they will also work on those, spread that out to the grassroots. And it's a true blessing to have a group like this to work with, to give us the good numbers, the good data, and the people to work with. And we just want to say that we appreciate OCPA.
I want to concur as a legislator. It's great to have the work of OCPA helping us to prioritize. You know, budgets are all about priorities and choice. And if we have $5 and we spend it on a non-priority, a non-core item, that's $5 less that we have to spend on a core function of government, education, public safety, things like that. I grew up in a family. My father was a public servant in a small town, which means that we didn't have a lot of money, and so we learned early on the idea of prioritizing core needs. And so as a result, I never went without food or clothing, but I did go without a lot of extra things. As a young child, I'd oftentimes want something, and my parents taught me a very important principle, and that is that money doesn't grow on trees. And so we had to learn about choice. Unfortunately, at the federal government, our elected officials there don't understand this idea of prioritizing and choosing. They somehow think that money grows on trees, and so they just decide to fund everything, which means that they tax our citizens more, and they print money, which means the money that is left in our citizens' pockets is worth less and less. And so it's that much more important for us as Oklahomans to make sure that every penny that we take from the taxpayers is something that is being used on a core function of government. I want to remind us all in closing that Article 2, Section 2 of our Constitution in Oklahoma actually says that all persons have the inherent right to life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, and then a line that we oftentimes don't talk about up here when we're spending money. And they also have the inherent right to the enjoyment of the gains of their own industry. the money that we're spending comes from the hard work of people in Oklahoma, so we need to make sure that we're prioritizing correctly. And again, we appreciate all the work of OCPA.
Thank you, OCPA, for the work that you've done. One of the things that we're looking at in some of the committees, and the people you're seeing up here in front of you work on different committees that are very interested in these things, in government modernization, states' rights, and several other committees. One of the things that we're looking at in a task force and in a bill is where is the $7.5 billion that the federal government sends directly to the agencies coming from? Who gets it? When do they get it? How much money is it? And what strings are attached to that money? We want to see that, put that through the appropriations process as applicable, so that those who represent the citizens can have a chance to have a say over what it is that we do with that money, and whether or not we're going to accept the strings or not. And we do appreciate you guys very much at the OCPA and the work that these fellow legislators are doing as well. Thank you.
Can you say your names when you get up there for us?
State Representative David Brumbaugh. I want to thank OCPA again for being the only true legitimate think tank that deals with fiscal issues. I'm Vice Chairman of Non-Appropriated Funds, and we're dealing with, while the state deals with about $6.9 billion, we're dealing with $11 billion. Anytime you get a fine, a fee, a grant, that hurts our taxpayers. And what we're talking about here is a very thoughtful, reasoned approach to tax reduction. And if you look at the 9 states that have no longer have a personal income tax, their revenues have increased, their population has increased, and their overall fiscal stability has increased. So I just want to thank all these legislators, and I want to thank OCPA for carrying the torch for tax reform in this state.
John Eccles from House District 90. I want to thank OCPA. When I heard about this press event, I was very eager to come, because when you look at their tagline on their budget, state budget that respects your family budget. As a freshman, something I knew when I got here, and I found out Oklahoma doesn't have any money. There are no printing presses in the basement. The money that we are appropriating today belongs to the taxpayers. It's their money. What we have to do is make the strong decisions to determine how do we best use taxpayer funding. I appreciated Representative Newell talking about his upbringing. I remember one of my favorite sermons I heard in church was that if you made the big decision, a lot of the little decisions became easy. The big decision is understanding this is the money of the citizens. It's not ours. That's what makes it easier to make the tough decisions. Are we funding core functions of government? Are we using it properly? Are we protecting it from fraud, waste, and abuse? That's why we are so grateful as legislators to have OCPA to put out things like this to help ensure that we are accomplishing those goals. Thank you.
All right, at this time, Jonathan Small is going to take some questions, and then we'll wrap up here in just a moment. Thanks.
Usually when someone says the core services of government are education, health, transportation, or public safety, you make cuts to education, transportation, public safety, and health. How is that helping core services?
Could you explain to me where you see
the
that?
Department of Education is $344,000 cut. Department of Transportation, $567,000. Sorry, my glasses. $567,000. Health Department, $267,000. Corrections, $24,000.
Actually,
$5 million. Sorry.
Actually, if you read that, if you properly read that, you will notice that it says savings from state employee health insurance reform. That represents the savings that the agency would experience by better efficiently providing health benefits without having to cut those benefits at all. So what you see there is the savings based on the number of employees that they have from state employee health insurance reform. You can read about state employee health insurance reform on page 5. Those recommendations come from the bipartisan commission that took place in 2010, where you saw Insurance Commissioner Kim Holland, who was a Democrat, and other lawmakers working, Representative Morgan, That was the Democrat minority floor leader. He worked on those recommendations as well.
So those cuts are related to the health insurance.
Right. That's what it would be, the reduction in lower premiums that agencies, they wouldn't have to pay as high insurance premiums now because of the reform.
Also in the area of like in education, oftentimes in our state budget, we take things that many of us would consider to be non-core functions like funding for the arts, funding for public television, some things like that, and many state budgets are just put underneath the education framework, and we would argue that not all of that is actually core funding for education.
If you had one, if you could do one, what would it be? Say by the end of the session, if only one thing got changed significantly in the budget structure, what would Jonathan Small do?
Well, I'm going to say that there needs to be two, because there's one that's just an emergency that we have to deal with. But the first one is there's no excuse why Oklahoma has not adopted state employee health insurance reform. There's been bipartisan support for it. The state just needs to do it. Indiana has proven with its employees already that it works. So I think that that's something that has to take place. Also, Medicaid reform must take place this year. We've seen state spending grow 277% since fiscal year 2000 on Medicaid. Our Medicaid enrollment has grown from roughly 412,000 to over 1 million. That's regardless of the economy. That's regardless of the fact that we're in the top 5 in unemployment. So that's an issue that must be addressed this year. We need lawmakers to be supported, because people that benefit from the state spending too much money on Medicaid are heavily lobbying legislators not to reform the Medicaid program. So those are the two things that we've got to see get done this year.
Now, you do have several legislators here, but this is a pretty small group as far as overall. Is there going to be an effort? I mean, because we don't see like Senator Jolly, who's Senate Appropriations, chairman, and we don't see the kind of the major players when it comes to who figures out the state budget. What good would all this do?
Let me tell you what I think OCPA's role is, and then I'll let individual lawmakers give their perspective. Our job is to show Oklahomans the ideas, to actually scrutinize and look at the budget and show where improvements can be made. And then as we do that, and as we work to educate lawmakers on where we feel like voters feel that spending should be increased or decreased, they hopefully will take those recommendations. And we feel like today is the start of that. We will be able to have discussions with a lot of lawmakers in the future as the state budget is created, and I'll let some of the other lawmakers talk about specifics.
John, following up, is there anything in particular that's different this year than last year on the health reform?
I think that
insurance.
What I think we have seen some positive reforms. One is the two agencies that were kind of providing health benefits have been combined. We've seen a very small stabilization of the employee benefit allowance, but really it wasn't much of a fiscal change because they locked in the overpayment amount at current levels. My understanding is that right now there is a working group trying to look at the issue and trying to see about how you could pre-fund health savings accounts, but it's time for it to become a priority so that it can be implemented on January 1, 2014.
Now, your proposal on the health benefits, can you explain it to a layman here? What exactly are you proposing? To get rid of the health benefit allowance completely, or the option, or what?
Yeah, what we're saying is to do what Indiana and a few other states have done, which is move all employees to a health savings account plan. What that brings to the program is now a product that's based on choice and making healthy decisions. The state would completely fund that. Then the state would also pay the premiums that would be owed. And by doing that, citizens make better choices when they don't have an open-ended program. When they are able to make choices based on a funded health savings account. What Indiana did, they didn't lower any benefits that employees received at all, but they saw employees be wiser about how they chose their benefits. So what we're deciding is that what we think the state should do is put money on the front end where employees can do things like preventive health care as opposed to waiting for some of the more chronic problems that happen because they're always worried about a small deductible.
Is there even a bill to do that this session?
Well, I think that one of the great things that can happen is that there doesn't have to be a bill for that to happen. And there, as you know, from being with the legislative process, there's a number of shell bills that could be used for the legislature to mandate it if it's not taken up by the Office of Management and Enterprise Services. Yes, go
Weigh in on that.
Last year, we sponsored legislation, Jason Murphy, House District 31, we sponsored legislation creating a working group that Jonathan talked about. The working group met through the interim last year, and I think we came to a consensus that a consumer-driven HSA approach was best. The challenge, of course, is the initial funding. The working group recognized the fact that there doesn't have to be legislation to create it, that it can be created through OMES and through the new consolidated infrastructure. And I think the idea was that we would wait and allow their new advisory committee that's come together after the consolidation to weigh in on it, see internally how they would like to handle it, and then next year, depending on that decision, I think you could potentially look at legislation, maybe if legislators weren't content that that reform was progressing aggressively enough. But I think OCPA has constantly opined on this issue, and Jonathan has been a huge proponent of it. And so we've taken it very seriously. We're making progress. The ball's really in OMES's and the executive branch's court right now, but as soon as next year could come back to us. But they can do what they need to do, I think, to realize a lot of this vision.
And what, do you have an idea, a ballpark figure? I understand that they have to, you know, almost line item it by agencies. Do you have a ballpark figure on what that one-time cost would be, or for the transition?
It would all depend on plan design, and if the entire plan was seeded, how quickly the program evolved and employees chose to enroll in it. Obviously, with incentive up front, you drive that choice a lot quicker, and as the Indiana model showed, once it gets rolling, the momentum picks up when people realize how strong that plan is for their personal budgets. They'll start enrolling in it in strong numbers. But the the debate gets to how do you seed it and how quickly can you get that momentum going until it reaches that critical mass.
And one of the things
is that 75 million?
Right, the
projecting?
savings that we would project to see would be around 75 million, which is roughly about 7% of the total self-insured and health insurance premium cost that the state pays for employees right now. One of the things that I want to point people to is that on just that example. Exactly. If you look at our budget on page 8 and 9, we provide a funding mechanism for the legislature to carry forward roughly $277 million. You see it there on the bottom of page 9. That's an example where if the legislature determines that it doesn't want to recoup or capture the benefit allowance in the beginning to fund those, you could easily begin to fund several of those funds with $60 million. I also wanted to point out that in our budget, as we mentioned, we recommend several areas where government needs to improve, but we don't recommend that those funds be taken away from the agency. You know, the OCPA has talked significantly about the need for reforms in higher education. We recommend that higher education recommend those reforms, but you notice that there's not a cut there to the budget because we'd like to see agencies start moving that direction and being rewarded for making those decisions.
Jonathan, in the long term, as you know, one of the real large concerns is the unsustained, I should say, unfunded liabilities like in the pension system. The package of 4 proposals added together that are pending from the House over to the Senate, do you think those are the kind of thing that would bring that $11.1 billion unfunded liability down further?
Yeah, you know, I do think that the plans that are existing, from what I've seen in the legislature, are definitely good steps to continue in the right direction. Our budget book talks about the need for pension reform. We will be releasing, and during this legislative session, a study on how the state can fully convert to a defined contribution plan for state employees only, and how that plan can result in savings. We think that it makes no sense for non-hazard duty employees to not be in a defined contribution plan, which is what most of the taxpayers are in. And we think that that can be done, and it's shown that that can be done, particularly in OPERS. OPERS has a unique opportunity to this year begin allowing better choice and incentivizing state employees better by moving to a defined contribution plan.
There are dueling tax plans out there. The Senate has the top rate going from 5.25 to 4.75, and the House one goes from 5.25 to 5. Which one does the OCPA support?
Well, I think that, I don't want to talk in specifics about someone's specific plan, but what I will say is that when you're talking about tax cuts and tax reform, those are two different things. When you look at the plan that was offered by the Senate, what it actually ends up doing is resulting in taking away personal exemptions and tax credits and actually increasing the effective tax burdens for Oklahomans. We think that's the wrong way to go. But we also think that the Senate is proposing a huge reform in replacing our workers' comp system. That's another reform that's going to impact the budget. If we hurry up and get to speed on that and get that done, that's savings that both state and local government would see. I think if you compare the tax plan that OCPA recommends to what the governor and the speaker have recommended, our plans look very similar, where we don't increase anyone's tax burden, we don't increase anyone's taxable income, but yet we still allow money for core services. And even in OCPA's budget, as I said, we allow for the legislature to be able to carry forward $270 million. One of the things that I also forgot to mention is our budget also provides funding for the reforms at DHS, an increase in funding that's needed for the Pinnacle program. So there's a number of things where we actually increase spending, but we are also doing that focused on core services.
Okay, it sounds like you said you didn't want to comment about a specific plan, but I think what I just heard you say was that the Senate plan's not the right way to go and that you like the speaker and the governor's plan.
Well, I talked about those from a tax policy perspective.
Okay.
There's also other bills that are out there that I think do some of the similar things where it's just an across-the-board rate cut. So that's what we support. If you guys are telling me those are the only two plans that are left right now, then that would be correct. That yes, we would prefer the way that the speaker and the governor's plan looks better.
Yeah, just to clarify real quick on that, as a C3, OCPA can't endorse or oppose a specific bill. We can't tell anyone vote for this or don't vote for that. That's why Jonathan has to be careful.
But you like the concept of a flat cut without the overhauling the deductions.
Yeah, in short, the tax cuts are working. There's growth revenue for the state right now. So why not, out of that growth revenue, do a cut that everyone can experience, everyone at all income levels and socioeconomic status in the state can enjoy and find opportunity and prosperity out of that, rather than clouding the code even more.
Are you going to put a defined contribution for all employees on the table in this year, this session?
We're going to have a proposal
not just new employees.
Right, we would put out a proposal that would show for any new employees. We believe that state employees that have come to work to the state, before a certain date, there was a contractual agreement that they made for the defined benefit plan that they have. And we think that the state should keep its promises that it's made, but then we also think the state needs to realistically look at the future so that we can continue promises to future employees.
I also saw the earmarks that you pointed out. I know I've talked to you in the past on several of these, but those keep getting in, even though everybody talks about how they're bad. But when it's your district, people want to get stuff, whether it's the Youth Expo or the Tulsa State Fair or the Medicine Park Museum.
Right. Or aquariums or other things like that. Well, I think you bring up a great point, and that's part of the reason why OCPA is here. So with that, we can continue to elevate the dialogue about what's the proper use of taxpayer funds. I think that Pro Tem Bingman is a great example of what happens when you champion a great cause for a while, and he has kept after it and should be commended for leading the cause to replace our workers' comp system. OCPA gladly wants to join with these lawmakers and others to point out where government is taking money out of their pockets and using it for wrong purposes, and to eliminate that. So we're going to continue to talk about it as long as it keeps happening, just like you see Senator Tom Coburn talk about it on the federal level.
I think we're going to get ready to wrap up. I'm going to ask Brian Bush to come and close us out. And one final point that I'll make on this, based on a question that was asked earlier. Up here in the halls of the Capitol, the way government gets its business done, there is someone lobbying for every special interest. But the most important interest that we need to remember are the families in Oklahoma, are the taxpayers, are the children that are going through our education system, are the people that are driving on our roads. And so it's important that when we approach government and we approach what government should do, you get two opinions out here. One opinion is government should be all things to all people, and the other opinion is that we should empower our citizens to thrive, and that's what this budget is designed to do. So with that, Brian Bush, EVP of OCPA, please close this out.
Well, I just want to say thank you to all the members of the press that were able to join us today, and a special thank you as well to these lawmakers who are here. Your leadership here at the Capitol is very appreciated. We appreciate what you're doing and the hard work that you're doing. And I think that the common theme that you heard throughout the day today with all of these speakers really gets back to the Oklahoma family. There are some really important things about the Oklahoma family and the businesses that they own and the businesses that employ them, and how important it is that we make sure that they're able to be successful. And so when we look at these things, the reason that we care about the size of the state's budget or the amount of the taxes that you owe to the state of Oklahoma is because we fundamentally believe that that dollar in your hands is far more productive than that dollar in the hands of anyone in this building, even those with good intentions. Even when they have good intentions, that dollar will be better spent by the taxpayers of Oklahoma. And our economy will be healthier, and we'll all be more free because we were able to make those choices and do that ourselves. And that's why this matters to us. So it's not just about the size of the budget for the sake of the size of the budget, or the amount of the taxes just for their sake. It's about keeping those hands keeping that money in the hands of the taxpayers because they'll be more free and they'll be able to make better decisions with it. So we appreciate the work that's going on here at the Capitol. We're excited about being a part of this process and educating folks about the policies that we think will put Oklahoma on solid financial footing for the very distant future as well, and also being able to be competitive. We're competing with states every day. We're competing with other states for jobs, and we want to have the most pro-business, pro-growth opportunities that we can here in our state so that we attract businesses here and make all of our citizens better off. You can learn more about all of these things at our website. It's www.ocpathink.org, and you can sign up there to receive emails about what we do. You can see our publications, and these studies and this budget book itself will all be available for you to see and look over the numbers yourself. And we appreciate you for taking the time to be here, and with that, we are adjourned. Thank you. Thank you for coming. I'm the executive vice president.